it's potentially going to completely burn to the ground and or possibly extend to other structures as well. So 5 minutes is a lot, especially with modern combustibles. So in the fire service, we have two different types of combustibles that we generally talk about. One is legacy, and those are things that are predominantly like older types of materials that are built out of wood, stuff like that were common in houses 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. And then you've got basically composite materials that are fabricated that have come around in the last couple decades. And a lot of that is materials that are basically have glues, plastics, stuff like that, and have been compressed and created in factories or synthetics. And typically those particular types of materials burn with twice the actual BTUs or British thermal units. So the same density of object is creating twice as much energy when it actually burns as a legacy object. So the time for it to reach what we would classify as like flashover would be a lot less than what a legacy item would be. And you may ask, like, what is flashover exactly? So flashover is basically when the contents of a room gets so hot that even the smoke itself basically catches on fire. So a room can basically go from a couple hundred degrees to well over 1,000 degrees under a flashover condition. And it basically, if firefighters are caught inside that, they have seconds to basically live, or they have to change the actual environment, one of the two.
What do you mean change the environment?
They have to cool the environment down or change something about the environment. The environment itself is getting worse and worse and worse for them to be able to survive it. So they have to make some kind of change, meaningful change to the environment to change it to basically be more survivable, or they got to leave, one of the two. There's two options. Basically, like, you need to do something to change it to make it safer.
Would it be like breaking down a wall, like changing the environment, or like what? How do you change the environment?
You can direct water, basically streams, directly into the top of the ceiling. So heat rises, right? Okay. So the coolest part of a room is always going to be closest to the ground. So you're trained to basically be on the ground. Now you're also trained to have a hose line or be near a hose line. You don't want to get away from a hose line and not have water, because that's basically safety, right? And you can also follow that back to get back out to out where you came in from. So changing the environment would basically be using that water that you brought in with you to direct it up towards the ceiling at the superheated gases to cool down that environment. Where it can be hot enough where you spray water into the ceiling area and it doesn't come down as water. It basically converts to steam up there and it changes it, but it will also cool the room down.
Okay. I guess that brings me to my next question. You know, we're talking about drones, and maybe your friend that comes next time can help answer this, but why aren't helicopters used more? And by helicopters, you know, sending people over, or, you know, like the big one that your friend flies, can they just fly an engine to the location to be 5 minutes faster? And I know they're heavy, but I think those things carry tanks sometimes and stuff, right?
So you're talking about like a Chinook helicopter?
Yeah,
like a military style helicopter?
Like a military style helicopter, and then just airlift the whole engine and crew to the fire.
I honestly, man, I just think that would be cost, number one.
Budgetary reasons.
Yeah, because the Chinook itself would be very, very expensive. Two, you'd have to have the pilot, right? I don't know how long it takes to get into the Chinook, fire the Chinook up, right? Start it, then basically, you know, it might take longer to do all that and go through all the safety features and stuff like that, and to start a helicopter of that magnitude up to fly it somewhere. Now that might be a possible scenario if you had to fly far, like really, really far, and then it made it worth it, like for like a deployment or something like that, or a wildland urban interface situation where you had to get a bunch of additional engines from one state to another state or something like that to help somebody else out. But I don't necessarily think that that's realistic for like everyday responses within a municipal city or a county or something. I just don't think that money-wise, at least right now, that it really necessarily pencils out.
In the area that you cover in Vegas, what area would take you the longest to get to, and how much time would that be?
That depends on a lot of factors, right? So it depends
You have
on...
the worst traffic and every single thing that could be bad.
I would say that like probably in the southwestern portion of the valley, we have just a little bit more sparse coverage. Typically, as the city builds out, we build fire stations based on population density. So once an area kind of reaches a certain amount of population density and the tax base can actually support it, then another fire station will go in. But a fire station typically takes a couple of years from the time it gets approved to the time it gets built to the time it gets funded to the time when people are actually there, etc. So there's usually a good amount of space that the next over fire engine or fire station has to cover before a new station is basically developed and dropped in and placed there. So the newer areas of the city have, I would say, a little bit slower response coverage towards the edges or the periphery, generally speaking.
How long would that take?
That obviously, that's just going to depend. Like it depends on factors like traffic, factors of if that particular first in engine might already be on a different call or another emergency. It's just hard to like necessarily 100% pencil something down that's got so many variables.
I guess what I'm curious about is if I lived in that area and someone is having a medical emergency, should we put them in the car and start driving towards the hospital? Or should we just call 911 and wait, or should we try to rendezvous with them on the path?
Again, that kind of depends on a ton of different variables. So
What would you do if you were?
Well, that also depends. So sometimes I would just call 911 and wait.
Okay.
And potentially perform whatever corrective actions that I have. Other times I might put them in my own vehicle and go to the closest hospital. But I'm not everybody, right? So I'm not the common person. So I'm much more able to handle stress in those types of situations because I've done it thousands of times than the common person. So I don't know if the common person is going to be able to basically think completely clearly, put somebody inside a vehicle, drive there, talk them through something, talk to the hospital staff, let them know exactly what's going on, understand what the history, allergies, and medications are, describe the symptoms correctly of what's taking place, describe what happened beforehand to them of what's taking place. It's both. So it's a lot of it, some of it's training, but a lot of it's also experience. So there is a difference between a brand new firefighter paramedic and a 20-year firefighter paramedic. So it's like you've mentioned it before and other things, like it's like the 10,000 hour rule, right? So if you've done something for well over 10,000 hours, you should be a master of that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I'm reminded of Captain Sully, the voice recordings that they had, how he was just very calm and not, didn't seem so excited. You couldn't tell, from his voice that, hey, this is like we might die right away, you know, and so
Right.
there's some level of being collected and being able to handle the situation logically and methodically as opposed to just
Right. He's a professional.
yeah
There's a difference between being a professional and an amateur,
yeah
and somebody that's not even an amateur. You know what I mean? Somebody that just has no experience and no training at something. So
so
I would say in most cases, people should probably call 911 and hedge their bets and then do everything that they possibly can in the meantime for 911 to get there.
um,
Unless you live in like some kind of really, really rural place where it's going to take a long time for them to get there. But most larger municipal cities, the fire service is relatively quick and relatively well trained.
So when things go horrible, like the Palisade fires, what are things now? You know, a lot of people are rebuilding the homes there, and you know, they're very concerned about another situation like this happening. I think stuff like, you know, people are predicting that things like this might happen more frequently. What are things that new home builders can do? You know, like if they were to ask you as a consultant, what can we do to try to make our home safer or be protected for a little bit longer if the fires come, or if the firefighters can't come for a while? I think I heard you mention something about like have spray the roof with water or foam or something like that. What are some of the things that people can have or purchase when they're building their homes to?
Well, one is to just kind of understand like where you actually live, right? Like what is the threat of where you actually live? Do you live in a wildland urban interface? Do you live in a completely wildland location? How old is the structure that you're actually in? What kinds of historical fires have taken place in that area, you know, back dated throughout history? Understanding a lot of those things will help you kind of have a general idea of what potentially to expect. I don't think you can ever go wrong with basically clearing vegetation, especially dead vegetation, from close to and around your house, right? Understanding what the fire codes actually are as well, and complying with the fire codes, and then not having like combustible things like, for instance, like shake shingle roofs. They don't even allow you to have shake shingle roofs in a lot of different municipalities across at least the West, because those are like terrible for basically fire embers. So an ember can basically catch a fire from a remote location, can carry in the wind, land on your roof, and then your roof can basically catch on fire and then possibly burn your entire house down. So just making sure that your house is more or less like fire hardened against certain types of things. If you live on a hillside, fire burns uphill, right? So it has the tendency to come up the hill towards your actual house versus down the hill, especially if it's coming uphill and it's in the direction of winds during the drier portion of the year. So that would be a potential location that you would want to definitely have a defendable space. So we talk about basically creating a defendable space, which is kind of like, if you think about it like medieval terms, like a moat, right, around your castle. So you want to have like an area around your house that you're going to minimize what can burn and what can actually extend to your structure and catch your particular house on fire. Then additional other things that you could possibly do is, you know, use or have like maybe garden hose or an old fire hose or something like that around, where you can pre-wet down your actual vegetation around your house, wet your house down. You can go and buy like a submersible pump or even rent a submersible pump for cheap from like Home Depot or Lowe's. Like I've pumped out thousands of gallons of water from my pool, and they've given me like a fire hose to do it when some of the monsoon rains were here and filled my pool up, and I had to pump a couple thousand gallons out of my pool. And like you just throw it in the pool, turn it on, and it'll pull water out of your pool, and you can pump a lot of water just simply like that. So if somebody has an average size pool, which is 15,000 gallons of water, like that's like a fire engine carries 500, right? So that's a lot of fire engines worth of water. Like a water tender, like the ones that we use, they're like 3,000 to 3,500 gallons. A pool's 15,000 gallons worth of water.
Where should we spray that water? On the bottom, on the roof, or?
Well, I mean, if you've got a fire coming, right, and if you're being told to evacuate, you're going to want to basically set everything up, I would say, and then pre-spray down all of your vegetation, right? Predominantly your vegetation around your house.
You mean like the trees?
Yeah, trees, bushes, anything that you think that could possibly catch on fire. So if it's wet, it's just harder for it to basically burn, right? And then if you get your roof wet, stuff like that wet as well, that will also just make it harder to burn. And then if that stuff is set up and the fire department knows that it's set up, right? Even if you go and evacuate, then they at least have access to it. So you just made their job easier for them. So it made it easier for them to protect your house. So when they have to choose of what to protect and what not to protect, they're basically in their minds conducting like a rapid triage. And a triage is like, how do I do the most good with the least amount of time, right? So if you've got possibly like 5 different houses and you look down the block and you're like, man, I could save 2 of these. But this one here, the person basically already did a bunch of work for us. You know what I mean? Like, that's probably a good house to choose, right? Because you're going to probably get a better result from basically helping somebody that already helped themselves than somebody that's got a ton of vegetation all growing around their house. They've got a bunch of stuff that can catch on fire. They haven't been doing much to prepare for fire season in that particular situation as well.
The Palisades, I know that it was like the Eaton fires or something, and there are different fires that were happening at the same time, but it was slowly progressing. And then some people were like, the next day they go, oh, now you are told to evacuate. Another day passed by, and they said, you're going to have to probably evacuate. And it progressed over days for some of them. So if you saw a fire that potentially was coming over, would like chopping down all of the trees and bushes or doing some of that stuff help out then, like just getting rid of it altogether around your home?
I mean, I don't know if you want to like necessarily chop something to the ground. If you've got like a 25-year-old tree that's totally healthy and stuff like that, I mean, that's an expensive tree, right? Like, what are you going to do with that? Like, that might or might not be. That's up to you, right? I'm not going to necessarily advise somebody to go like scorched earth and like chop everything around their house down. But if you've got a bunch of stuff that's like overgrown, dead, close to your house, if you've got a bunch of stuff that's stacked up, if you have a bunch of like dead pine needles that have like fallen down and they're all over the top of your roof, 100%, you should basically get rid of all that stuff. So the less there is to burn, the less there is to burn, right? So the less likely that particular fire can extend and get into your particular structure. So whatever you can do to basically like harden your own structure and prepare for the coming storm, then yeah, you should 100% do it.
Did they run out of water in the Palisades?
I don't know, in all honesty, like I'm not 100% sure that they may have run out of water pressure.
Okay.
So you can have water, right? It's possible to have water, but if you run out of pressure, that's also equally as detrimental as running out of water itself. So if you have, every single fire hydrant open in a particular area, and the pressure drops to basically